sessions, Scaling Agile to the Enterprise with HP Agile Manager. We've got Ty Davis and John Falk joining us. And so if we move on to the first slide. So this event is brought to you by HP. Both Ty and John Falk are from HP, and I hope you enjoy the event. So a little bit about myself. So my name is Stevan Shigratnovich. I work for a company called Infuse, and we're a HP Gold certified partner of HP. We have our own tool that utilizes HP, UFT, and ALM to do test automation called Use Mango. I've been in software testing for over 20 years now, and in the past few years focusing very heavily on Agile. So this presentation is of keen interest to me. I'm also the Agile SIG lead in the UK, and I'm looking to set up a Agile SIG event within the next couple of months, ideally, based in London. So for those of you that are UK and particularly London-based, please keep an eye out on the Defect website, and hopefully there'll be an event coming up soon. So next slide, and this is not about me, this is all about Ty and John. So I'll just quickly introduce you to the guys. So Ty Davis is HP Agile Manager, he's a product marketing manager for HP software. He's got a great experience in the technology trends, working with various strategy and product marketing roles across Agile and the application lifecycle management. Currently product manager for HP Agile Manager. I'll ask them to both say hi in a moment. The second person, the person who will be doing the majority of talking, I believe, and will give you an excellent demo later on, is John Falk. He's a solution architect. He's been responsible for working with clients to help them with the adoption of enterprise agile methodologies and maintaining industry standard best practices. 20-year plus career in corporate IT, and specializes in application development. He's a senior director of a global teleconference company, or has been, I better add, and he's managed continual evolution of IT systems. So basically, John's got a very strong technical background, as well as being the solution architect for Agile Manager. So, Ty and John, do you want to say hello, guys?
How's it going?
Thanks, Stevan. This is John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ty. So, on to the next one. This is a live session, and it is being recorded. All the recordings are available to Vivid members. If you're not a Vivid member, I would encourage joining. And additionally, today's slide deck and webinar will be made available usually within 24 to 48 hours after the session ends. And we will send you a link once posted. Please ask questions as you go along. And the way to ask questions will be to use the questions pane. So on to the next slide. John, if we can move to the next slide. That's great, thank you. So if you look on the webinar control panel, there will be a pull-out area called questions and chat. Please post your questions in there. At the end of the presentation, we will do a Q&A session, and we'll go through some of the questions that have been posted. So please keep the questions coming in as you go along. Okay, so let's get started. Over to Ty.
Thank you. Appreciate the introduction. Hi everyone, my name is Ty Davis. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about today's agenda. I'll be providing a high-level overview of the Agile Management product. And then John will highlight the demo, which we've broken into several segments. John will cover user story management and IDE integration, dashboard and reporting capabilities, then integrations to ALM QC, and additional features within the Agile Manager solution, with time at the end for questions. So the industry has seen this growing adoption of Agile development methodology across large corporations and enterprises, but with mixed success. That's because Agile, traditionally, doesn't scale very well, and HP looked at providing a solution for scaled enterprise agility. We knew there needed to be visibility and collaboration at a large scale. There needed to be a balance of velocity and quality, and this is critical as we've spoken to a lot of organizations that have said, hey, I want to implement Agile development because we want to release working code more quickly. We want to update our software more quickly. Unfortunately, quality is generally an afterthought. And if they don't have that balance of velocity and quality, they're not going to have successful implementation of Agile development. And third, we want to make sure that they have a balance of complete lifecycle agility, not just development efforts within Agile, but project conception, requirements planning, application development, ultimately over to testing and production deployment.
Okay, so we come to our first polling question. Are you currently using another HP software product? And please check all that apply. So, John and Ty, this whole topic sounds terribly exciting around Agile and having a corporate-wide tool. I mean, how do you perceive the need for this tool?
Hey, this is John. I'll jump in there. I think what we see a lot of organizations looking for is that tighter integration between the development organization and the quality testing organization, ultimately moving to more of a DevOps solution. But they have to start implementing that in stages. And historically, we've seen a little bit of separation between the development organization and the quality teams, where a lot of times, especially in an Agile environment, where the developers are developing code at even a more accelerated rate now, 2-week sprints, and they're throwing working code over to the testing team more frequently. And we need to make sure that the testing team is working lockstep with the development organization to make sure they're able to maintain a high level of not only quality, but delivery of functioning code. And so this enterprise agility, not just scaling the development portion across the enterprise, but also integrating it with the testing organization, the development tools, the build tools themselves, to really look at it as a complete solution.
I would concur with you on that one, John. That's certainly experience that I've been seeing here as well. So, over to Ty. Do you want to comment on the results?
Yeah, it looks like with the results we have about 67% ALM users, 43% quality center. And again, this may be multiple users, it's not just one. About 30% PPM, 25% that use other HPE tools, and about 11% at none. So it shows us good results on, we have a strong community of HP tool users here. What we can do is move on to the next slide. There we go. The reality is most large enterprises aren't homogeneous environments. They still have a lot of traditional waterfall development happening. They've just introduced Agile, and then that leads to a hybrid environment where they may have a large waterfall project, but one component like a GUI interface that needs a faster refresh cycle is going to be done in an Agile methodology, so you have these hybrid environments. Or the organization hasn't fully embraced Agile, and they're running a mix of waterfall and Agile and more of a water scrum fall methodology, coupled with multiple developer tools, source code management platforms, build systems across many geographically distributed areas. In many instances, they have developers in North America, Europe, offshore to Southeast Asia, and frequently the quality or IT teams are in different locations than the development organization. In order to alleviate the strain of managing these distributed developer platforms, by using Agile Manager in tandem with ALM, it provides that source of record, that single pane of glass to manage all requirements and defect information, as well as have visibility into the build and code systems deployed throughout the organization. Agile Management at its core is an Agile project management tool. It manages releases, user stories, and it has Defect Management module. What really differentiates an enterprise class tool from a non-enterprise tool are the ALI integration. ALI is Application Lifecycle Intelligence, and that provides visibility and synchronization to various IDEs, build systems, and source code management platforms. And of course, we have the native synchronization to other HP tools such as ALM and PPM. Some of the key characteristics of Agile Manager is that it's available as a SaaS-based or on-prem solution. The SaaS solution is hosted in the HP cloud and available as an instant on service. The on-premise solution is attractive to organizations that have regulatory and compliance issues or have a requirement to run an on-premise solution. The second part is key here. Agile Manager is developed with an Agile methodology itself. So we have regular releases driven by user feedback. Basically, there's a monthly release for Agile Manager. It's kind of a more feature function, an enhancement release. And every quarter there's a major release. And a lot of the features and functionality you'll see in the demo is a direct result of end user feedback. We have a very active customer base, and they are always giving us feedback about what enhancements they'd like to see in that tool. Many of those enhancements make it into our own product backlog, move up the list of prioritization, and they're ultimately deployed in a product or production release. You also see a modern, clean, intuitive user interface. We kind of wanted to make it like a smartphone app, where once you install it, you don't have to go through a huge learning curve and training to use the project. It's pretty intuitive and easy to use. Obviously, it doesn't replace getting any sort of Agile practitioner certification or Scrum Master certification, but just using the tool, moving a user story or requirement through the tool helps guide the end user along with the best practices of Scrum or Kanban. Lastly, the organization that are really looking to scale Agile across the enterprise, we are a SAFe certified gold partner. SAFe is a scaled Agile framework, and we can touch on that a little bit later. Agile Manager is broken into several distinct sections that really help simplify and quantify the development process. So there's a distinct section for release planning, and then it moves on to sprint planning, where you can do your team assignments, manage team velocity and capacity. There's a section for sprint execution, so we can deliver that code. And then something that we really think differentiates Agile Manager is a retrospect and close. We see a lot of organizations doing really well in the sprint planning and sprint execution, doing their daily stand-up meetings, but they don't do a really clean retrospective and close. When they don't close out a sprint completely, they tend to fall behind in the development cycle. So it's important from the entire life cycle, from beginning of our product all the way to the retrospective and close, to make sure that everything's wrapped up. The fourth step is really available through the first three steps completely, and that's a high level of visibility and insight. We're able to deliver that visibility and insight without the developer or testing organization doing anything out of the ordinary. Those teams are doing their normal work, and we're gathering those metrics on the back end and presenting those in a meaningful way that are actionable and the team can use to further enhance the software development. Through the entire process, we really look towards moving towards continuous testing and continuous deployment. So we want to automate and run regression testing not at the end of every sprint, but at the end of every build, so we can get information back to the development team as quickly as possible to identify defects and problems so they can be solved sooner rather than later. As Agile has evolved over time, it wasn't too long ago that the average sprint was 4 weeks. And after talking to a lot of organizations now, a 4 weeks seems almost more like a waterfall project, so we see a lot of 2-week sprints. So code is being delivered to QA and IT operations at an accelerated rate so frequently, it's becoming the bottleneck. So it's important to do this testing as quickly as possible and automate as much of it to alleviate those bottlenecks, not only on the testing team, but ultimately IT operations for product deployment. We have a native synchronization between Agile Manager and ALM Quality Center where we are synchronizing requirements, defects, test data, releases, and metrics. Via ALM and QC, you have access to the whole suite of products that are part of the tool, like unified functional testing, to automate your testing. Key part is at the bottom here. Using ALM and QC in sync with Agile Manager gives you enterprise support for both Agile and non-Agile projects. That's the reality of a lot of enterprises. From a third-party integration perspective, common IDEs like IntelliJ, Visual Studio, Eclipse. We have a source code management, Git, GitHub, SV, and TFS. Build systems like Hudson's, Jenkins, Electric Cloud, unit testing, code coverage. So all these integrations exist. Not only does HP develop and support them, as you can see the solid blue lines there, but we have 30 Bamboo, for example, are all third-party integrations that have been created for Agile Manager. Next, we'll go into the last polling question for John. Go ahead and start a nice little demo for us. So we'd like to see if you've heard of HP Agile Manager previously. A, yes, and currently an Agile Manager user. B, yes, but not currently an Agile Manager user. And C, no. Just watching the results here. It seems there's about a large majority, around 60% that have heard of Agile Manager but are not currently using. And about 25% are current Agile Manager users, and around 21% have not heard of Agile Manager and are not using that tool. So with that, I'm going to pass along to John here. He's going to go ahead and run you through a demo, and we'll have questions at the end.
Thanks, Ty, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar. Like I said earlier, for the demonstration today, hang on, let me get my screen sharing going. For the demonstration today, I'm going to kind of provide that high-level overview of Agile Manager, show you guys the interface, and then I'm really going to focus on that user story creation, user story management, along with the synchronization to ALM and Quality Center. And I think based on this group, this is an ideal presentation. It looked like we had a lot of ALM and Quality Center users out there, or people familiar with it. And actually, I saw a good-sized group of people that are using PPM as well, and we have that native synchronization with PPM. And then to show how those two tools really work together to form a seamless environment for managing not only your development efforts, but your quality and testing work as well. And then as time permits, I'll walk through as much of the interface as I can, showing additional features and functionality. And again, I'll make sure to leave 10 or so minutes at the end so we have plenty of time for some questions and wrapping things up. So you should all be seeing my screen now, and this is the Agile Manager interface. And we really tried to keep it simple and efficient to use. So Agile Manager itself is broken up into 6 distinct sections, kind of like Ty was talking about. We have the dashboard, where all of our charts and graphs and metrics are displayed for the team to have visibility and insight into what's happening in their development efforts. We have a product backlog, where we manage our releases, and we do all of our release planning, create our user stories, and determine what needs to be included in future releases. And then as we move left to right through the tool, we're going to move into release management. Once work has been assigned to a release, This is where we'll get more granular and we'll manage our individual sprints, sprint assignments. We'll manage our team's velocity, our team's capacity, and ultimately the tasks that we're working on in the task board or the storyboard. And then we have a separate section for defect management. Defect management integrates down to the IDEs. Defects can be created in the IDE through unit. Create a direct backlog perspective in the hierarchy, supports 3 layers of hierarchy. We have themes or epics, which are at the parent level. We have features, and then we have backlog items. Over here on the right-hand side, we have our various releases that are available for this project. And then we have our grid, or our section where we show all the detailed information, either the detailed themes, features, or backlog items. For today's demonstration, just to put some context around things, I'm going to use the concept of an HP media store. It's kind of like Amazon.com, an online store where we can purchase movies, books, and music. And then we also support multiple applications within Agile Manager, so you can have multiple development efforts happening simultaneously, and depending on what you have access to see, you select the application that you want to view, or all of them in this case. So again, a lot of granularity, a lot of capability to support enterprise production. So at this epic or theme level for my media store, I have a movie store, a book store, a billing store, self-provisioning. And then as I drill in the next layer down in the hierarchy, I have the features that are members of those themes. Credit card purchasing, audiobooks, music purchasing, book searching, for example. This is where we touch on some of the safe compatibility, where we do a weighted shortest job first score, cost of delay, so we can use safe methodologies for determining the prioritization of delivering work. And then we have the backlog. This is where all of our user stories are created, and this is where they're maintained and ultimately used to planning to go into a release. So again, we try to keep the interface very simple, very easy to use, and a simple flow for managing our projects. So I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a new item. And I'm going to create a new user story. And I'm going to use a template. You don't have to, but I can say, based on using a template, it's automatically going to create some generic tasks and test cases for me, test criteria for this user story. So although I could go create those manually, it's easiest to use a template. You'll notice only 2 fields have asterisks by them. So we have type and name have to be filled in. So Agile Manager also scales down very well for small projects or introductory projects, where I could just create a user story, give it a name, assign it to a release, and get going with my development. So again, scales down, supports smaller projects. But from an enterprise perspective, and where we have a more complex project like our media store, where I had themes, features, and a lot of backlog items, we want to be able to support a more complex hierarchy. So I'm going to take my new user as a user. I'll call it the Visit Webinar. I'm going to go ahead and assign it to one of my themes at the parent level. So I'll select the bookstore. And then under the bookstore, which is my theme or epic, I see all my available features. And I'll go ahead and assign this to the book purchase. I can assign it a priority. And then I could, if I knew the release and team I wanted to assign it to now, I could do that, but I'll save that for a little bit later. And then I can assign some story points. And I'm sure most organizations that are Agile already have a methodology for assigning story points. The one thing to note here is that themes, features, and backlog items are always measured in story points or levels of complexity. When we get into tasks, we measure those in hours because it's actual work that developers are doing. So story points for the user stories and the core work, and tasks are done in hours. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And it's going to add this new user story to the bottom of my product backlog. And so when I scroll down there, we should see my new user as a user, Visit Webinar. And again, we wanted to create a drag and drop interface to manage this. So to go ahead and assign this to a release, I'm going to assign it to my Media Store 2.0 release. I just simply pick it up and drop it on the release. and it'll now assign it to the media store and update all the velocity and the capability of our media store. And again, I can always drill in at our media store on any of the links. I can see how many teams are assigned to work in the media store. I can see the expected velocity for sprint. So just by clicking, I can help manage that release and to make sure that the assignments are fit within the scope that I've set for that release. But I'm going to show you now at this early stage, even though we've only just created user story, how we already give that visibility over to the quality team. So I'm going to switch screens over here to ALM, and that should be coming up now. And in the ALM interface, I see that same hierarchy because I've synchronized everything over from Agile Manager. I see my music store, my movie store, my book store. I see the features, album database, for example. And in this case, I see all the user stories that are part of that feature and what the current status is from an ALM perspective. So those of you who are familiar with ALM have seen direct cover status before, whether it's passed, whether it's failed, whether it still needs to be covered. I see the user story status coming in from Agile Manager. So if it's done, if it's in testing, the prioritization, and what cycle it's going to be part of. I've added this one to our bookstore, and it won't be here yet, so I haven't synchronized. So here you see these in a different state of progress. Visibility into what's coming at them, even though development hasn't started working on it yet. So in many cases, they've just created a new requirement, assigned it to a release, but they haven't started working on it yet. It's new. After development picks it up and starts working on it, it moves to an in-progress status, and that lets the quality team know that this is going to be imminent. Within this next sprint, Sprint 9, development is going to be finishing this work, and they're going to have to test this, so they can start planning their resources. We have a synchronization tool that's included at no additional charge with Agile Manager or ALM to synchronize between Agile Manager and ALM. This is a small application, runs on an automated basis. It can be set to run as near time as every 5 minutes. There's a new version of this that just released that's integrated into Agile Manager. It just released last weekend, so I haven't had a chance to set that up and configure it. But basically it works the same, where we have this small application or this small environment that just keeps synchronization between the platforms. And so now that I've run synchronization, and again, I'm just forcing synchronization for just the scope of going through this webinar, but normally that would be done on an automated process. And I'm sure the text probably is a little small, so hopefully you guys are looking at this in 100% or 110%. In this view, I can't change the text. But we see our new user story we added as a user visit webinar. It's obviously not covered. Testing hasn't been done yet. It's new, and I've assigned it to that release. So even in this early stage, the quality team gets visibility that a new requirement has been created. It has a priority, and it's in this part of the flow of the project that's being worked on. So beyond just the themes, features, and user stories that we synchronize over, within ALM, we also synchronize over all the release information. So I can go to the release screen, and I can see my media store release, my media store 2.1 release. I can see all the cycles or sprints, and I can see the dates that all those sprints are needing to be completed at. Again, just keeping that visibility over to the quality team so they understand what the developers are working on, what their time frames are, and what they need to test to make sure that testing is staying in sync with what development is developing. And then, of course, we have our defect management as well within ALM. So frequently, after testing is done, if a defect needs to be created, we would go ahead and create this new defect. So we'll call it just a vivid defect. And I'll assign it a severity and submit it. Now I've created that new defect. This synchronization is bidirectional. So if I create anything in Agile Manager, it's going to synchronize down to ALM. If I create anything in ALM, like this defect, it's going to synchronize back up to Agile Manager. Again, so we keep that visibility between both platforms, and we're able to maintain that system of record that Ty was talking about. So I'm going to go back up here to the requirements. And I'm going to leave this in new. I'm going to show you how this changes as we progress this user story through the process, and Agile Manager and development starts picking it up and working on it. I'm going to jump back over here to Agile Manager, and I have my Vivid webinar. I've assigned it to the release. And now again, moving left to right, I'm going to go to my Release Management tab. And now I see more detail. I'm looking at the Media Store 2.0 release specifically, and I see all the available sprints for this release. Sprint 9 is the current release. I see the teams and their available velocity that they can work on. And again, just like I did at the release level, I can drill in and look at an individual team, see what their expected velocity is per sprint, and see how well they're delivering on their velocity. So I see their expected velocity of 50 story points, and at a glance I can see whether or not they're delivering at that velocity. Obviously this team is falling short every time. Again, it really helps me determine if I need to do better sprint planning. Am I overestimating my story points? Or is the team just not delivering at the velocity that's expected? So at a glance, it really helps the team manage themselves to make sure that they're able to deliver all the information needed within a sprint. But I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. And added to the bottom here, I see my, as a user, Vivid webinar. And I'll go ahead and assign it to a team, and I'll just pick the blue team. And again, with that drag and drop interface, I change this assignment over to the blue team. And it's going to go ahead and update this to the blue team and their available capacity. I did that in Sprint 9. I'll move over to the sprint backlog. And here's where I see the detail now within that sprint. I'm building that grand the blue team specifically. And here I see my new user story that I created. And I see all the tasks, review the requirements, write the code, and run the unit tests that need to be done to deliver this story. In the sprint backlog, I can see I have user stories and a couple of defects that need to be worked on. And so these icons let you know whether it's a user story. It has a little user icon on it. If it's a defect, it has the broken page icon. So I can see whether we're working on defects or user stories within this sprint. But a defect is almost the same as a user story. It's just a development requirement that needs to be done within a sprint. And here's where I see all of my team members and their available capacity. And again, just like I looked at from the release at a high level, or I looked at the team at a high level, here I can look at the individual users or developers, and here's where they can manage their availability. And so I can see what sprints are available for, how many days of work they have, hours per day. Again, if a developer is going to be gone for a day, he can take his, I'm going to be on vacation, I'm going to drop this down to 5 hours of work that I'm available. This is where you can really manage not only the velocity that the team is delivering, but what their availability is. So again, very simple for their team to keep everything updated. And here's where I can assign work to the team members. So I'll go ahead and grab this and assign it off to give him ownership of the user story, and he by default gains ownership of all of the individual requirements. But I can go ahead and take the tasks, and I can go reassign those to other developers if I want to. So just by editing the details on the task, I can pull it up and say, instead of Tom doing this task, I'm going to go ahead and take this task and assign it to Michael Parker, and I'm going to update that. So the entire team can even work on individual tasks that are broken up within a user story. So I've gone through the release backlog, went into the sprint backlog, and now I'm going to jump over to the task board. And this is where we have that simulated whiteboard with the virtual Post-it notes that you can drag and drop, and the team can track their time. So we have these little time clocks, bubbles, if you will, or stopwatches. So if Michael spent some hours on this task, he can select the clock, reduce 2 hours on it. So before the daily stand-up meeting, he can keep the team up to date on what his deliverables are. And we can see the status of these, whether they're in testing or in progress. I'm going to go ahead and move this down to our new user story I created as a user of the Vivid webinar. We assign these 3 tasks: review the design requirements, write the code, and then run the unit testing. And so the developer, when he starts working on it, will drag it to in progress. And as it's going to change the status from new to in progress, and he's going to start reducing his hours of time. And then it updates his metrics or his visibility into what's happening from his story perspective. And then when he drags it over to complete, it retires all that time. And again, he can start just working on this effort, and he can do things in parallel, so he can be writing code and running unit tests and just keeping that updated to in progress. But the point here is I'm going to go back to ALM and again show how this continues to update the testing team on the progress that development is making. So I'll do a quick incremental synchronization. Again, this would normally run on an automated process. I'd set it to run every 5 minutes or so. That would update this information, but for the webinar, I don't want to wait. And I'm going to refresh. And go back down to my bookstore. And here I see the Vivid webinar has moved to an in-progress status. So now the quality team sees that development is actually working on this. It's been now assigned to a sprint. It's in sprint 9, the current sprint, and it's in progress. I will go back to Agile Manager, and I'm going to finish this work in this case. So I'll say, hey, I've completed writing the code, and I've run all of the unit tests. And when I set the last task to completed, not done, because it's all determining that definition of done in Agile, I'm going to change the status. I can move it from, I can leave it from in testing, and this is going to tell the quality team that development has finished their work, and they need to run testing on it. I'll go ahead and save this. It moves this from in progress to in testing. And again, I'm going to jump back to ALM. And it should take just a second. And let me refresh. And now when I go look at that new requirement, I see it's in testing. And now this is the indicator that development has finished their work. They've completed all of the tasks. It's up to quality to do the testing on it. Now what quality would normally do is they would right-click on this. If you're familiar with ALM, it looks like a lot of you are. And they would say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and convert this to a test, and I'm going to move it into the test lab and run all my Sprinter or UFT tests or whatever testing I need to do. In this case, I'm going to cheat. I'm not going to spend the time doing the testing on it. So I'm just going to change direct cover status to passed, and I'm going to set the story status to done. So I'm going to say, hey, quality has tested this, it's passed, because development has completed their work. The ball's in quality's court now to do the testing on it, and the developers are moved on to the next thing that they're working on, and they're just waiting to see what the results of testing are. So they're going to set direct cover status to passed and set this to done. And again, because we have that bidirectional synchronization, up until now, all this data has been coming down from Agile Manager over to ALM and Quality Center. This is the case now where the quality team has updated the user story, and we're sending that status back up to Agile Manager. And so we're going to go back to Agile Manager here one last time, and we'll look in the product backlog and look what this has been updated to. And when I go look at this story now, I see direct cover status is set to passed, and the story is done. So at this point, the developer is like, hey, everything's good to go. Quality has tested it. I've just been waiting to see what the result was, and now this is off my list. It's done, and this is ready to go in production with the sprint and with this release ultimately. What should be noted here is this direct cover status. You see it's kind of a light gray. This is not a settable field within Agile Manager. The only way direct cover status can be set is via synchronization up from ALM or Quality Center. So the developer cannot take direct cover status and set it to pass. It's not configurable. So moving this story status to done and getting this direct cover status is something that should come up from ALM or Quality Center. But the other thing I want to show here, I'm kind of keeping an eye on the time, is I want to show that full traceability. What happens when that story failed testing and the quality team creates a defect? So I'm going to jump over to the Defect Management module. And here I see all of the defects that we have listed, and I see linked items. So let's say I sent a story over, it came back as failed, and I see a link on it. I see this link chain. I know that the quality team has created an associated defect, and then it's up to the Agile team to determine the severity of that defect and when it needs to be worked on. It might need to be fixed in the current sprint if it's a showstopper, or maybe it's something simple like the position of a label on a GUI interface, and they say, hey, you know, this is something we'll just work on in the future. Let's move it to the product backlog, and we'll fix this when we have time, and maybe we're doing a defect sprint or something. So now some months go by, potentially. You know, what user story was being worked on or tested when this defect was introduced. And because it has a linked item, he can drill into the detail on this defect, and he can follow the link back to the user story that it's linked to. And when he clicks on the user story, he can see who originally worked on it, and he can go look at the development activity on that user story. And he can say, oh, Alex worked on this user story back in January 16th, and here's the source code repository that he had checked out and modified when this defect was introduced. So if Alex is still with the organization, Ty could go talk to Alex and say, hey, I'm working on this defect that you introduced with your requirements or your user story. Or maybe Alex has left the organization. At least he has that full traceability back to see, you know, what source code repositories to look at to start working on this defect. And these are all metadata links, so if this was live information, Ty would actually be able to click on this and open up that source code or do a .diff on it and really dig into getting this defect resolved. So this is just a case that shows that full integration between the IDE, where we can synchronize tasks and requirements down to the IDE, check out the code, check in the code, and it automatically updates Agile Manager with the development activity, and then that defect can be linked back to the requirement, and it's easy to see with the defect icon. So if I'm in the product backlog, for example, again, I can see that's linked to the defect. I can see the linked items. So it gives that ability to really work and bring not only development and quality together, but bring that full traceability back to the development environments and to the source code repository environments as well. So you get that, again, single interface, that single pane of glass to completely manage the project. And so I know that was a lot of information there, so there may be some questions on that at the end, but that's an example of that full traceability. I'm going to jump back to the release management, back to my storyboard. A couple of things I want to show you here, and something that Ty had talked about is that sprint closure. So after the sprint is done, we finished all this work, and we're doing our sprint retrospective and close. I'm going to drop back here to sprint 2 that I want to look at. There we go. And here in the retrospective and close, I get a wealth of information. So I see how many stories I've completed, how many defects I've worked on, did we have any new defects detected during the sprint, how many build breaks did we have, how much of this information was planned ahead of time or how much was added during the sprint. Hopefully, if sprint planning is going well, most of this information, most of the stuff we're working on is pre-planned. Sometimes you have showstoppers or things that need to be done in a sprint during the sprint cycle. So we have that in the added section. We can see from a cumulative flow diagram how much of the work did we complete, acceptance tests passed and failed, just to make sure we're getting everything done. We have some comment sections where we can put what went well and things we need to improve on. And then we have this section for non-development action items, just to make sure, again, as the sprint wraps up, that everything's getting done. So maybe we need to set an environment meeting with some of the team members. We might need to talk to IT operations because we need some additional server resources for this new release that's coming out. And the team can go through and make sure that everything is closed up at the end of the sprint. But you noticed when we did this sprint, we only finished 3 of the 4 user stories or 4 of the 6 defects. So what do we do with these open items? Again, we don't want anything lingering at the end of the sprint. So we have this little slider bar that says we have 3 open items. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I can see that I have this user story that's not complete. I can click on it and decide what do I want to do with it. I get a couple of options. I could just roll it to the next sprint and work on it in sprint 3, for example. Maybe the product owner and the team determined it wasn't that important anyway, so we could just move it back to the planning board or back to the product backlog, and we'll work on it in the future. Or what's most common is we can split this story. So let's say it was a big story. It had 12 hours worth of tasks, and we finished 10 of them. We just didn't get the last 2 hours worth of work done or the last couple of tasks done. Well, I can split the story, and I can leave the completed work in sprint 2 and only move the remaining work that needs to be done to sprint 3. So let's give credit where credit's due to the work that's done in sprint 2. And if we want, we can just move the remaining effort to sprint 3 as a split story. So in sprint 3, there's only going to be 3 hours or 2 hours of additional work or whatever's left on that story. So it gives us an opportunity to really close out that story really well and make sure we have a good close of that sprint. And then at the end of that sprint retrospective and close, I like to take a few minutes and look at this ALI summary and kind of see how we're on target for the release. I have still quite a few months left before this release is complete, but I get visibility in how I'm doing from a velocity perspective. I can see side-by-side comparisons. In sprint 3, I was delivering 100 story points, dropped to 92 story points in sprint 4, in sprint 5 down to 83 story points. So again, something the team can look at themselves and say, hey, why are we losing velocity? Again, are we not doing good sprint planning here? Are we not doing good estimating on our story points? Have we had people out on vacation? Why aren't we delivering at that higher rate we were back on sprint 3? And is this going to impact the ultimate end date of that release? So a lot of visibility, again, like Ty said, of people just doing their normal work and being able to understand what's happening, not only from a user story or requirements perspective, but up to the sprint and ultimately a release perspective. So a lot of metrics that are just available. And I have just a few minutes left. I did want to show you 2 more sections quickly. The build section, we have integration into the build systems like Ty talked about. So I can see from this interface whether the nightly builds have succeeded, whether they failed, how many lines of code are delivered on that build. And then I can scroll down and I can drill into the build detail. So I can select a build, for example, let's say it failed, or let's say there was some anomaly there. We had some test coverage issues. And I can go look at all the user stories delivered within that build. And again, because I have that link to that user story, I can say, hey, these user stories were included in this build. I can click on this user story and always drill into the detail and look at the development activity for that individual story as part of a build. So visibility not only from a sprint perspective, but from a build perspective as well. And then I can just go back up to the build summary. And the last thing I want to show before I wrap things up is a dashboard. So metrics and reporting is really important when we're scaling Agile across the enterprise. It's important to have good visibility into what's happening in your environment. So the dashboard is fully configurable and customizable. And here's where you would have all of your release burn down charts, your planning. In this case, I have a feature planned versus actual story points, group velocity charts. This velocity is increased because I added a team member because we were falling behind, for example. Here's my sprint burn down chart, flow diagrams, direct cover status, which is important, especially for the ALM user, so we can see whether direct cover status is not covered, whether it failed or passed. All of these widgets are customizable. We have a Add Widgets section, and so we just have dozens and dozens of pre-built widgets that can be added to the dashboard so you can look at the information that's important to you. And we also have a widget wizard. So if you want to create a custom graph or chart because there's some data elements that you don't see a graph for, or you've created some user-defined fields or custom fields, you can create your own charts to capture that information and display it the way you want it. And you can take any of these dashboards and you can save it as a public dashboard. So if you create a cool dashboard or one dashboard you want the entire team to see, you can make it public so everybody's looking at the same dashboard, or you can make it private if it's just a dashboard that you want to see. Let's say you're a product owner and you want to watch this particular developer to see how he's doing delivering on his user stories. You could create a private dashboard where you're watching the developers and you may not want them to know, for example. And then again, all the dashboard elements, from an enterprise perspective, if you're sharing this on a WebEx or a webinar like we are, and I want to make sure everybody's looking at the same graph or chart. I'm talking about a graph or chart, and there's a bunch of them on the screen. I can say I want to take this graph and I want to make it full screen. That way we're all looking at this planning chart to see how well I'm doing on my estimating. And obviously it doesn't look like I'm doing very well on this top one. I estimated 30 story points, and it looks like it's going to take me over 150 to deliver it, for example. So again, I can make sure we're all focused and looking at the same chart by simply expanding it up to the full screen. And I can change the layout of the dashboard as well. So I can change how many columns I want to look at depending on how I want to view my information. So a lot of flexibility in the dashboard and reporting. all of these metrics are automatically generated from the quality team that are doing their work in ALM and the development team doing their work in Agile Manager. So there's a lot more functionality here, a lot of screens I didn't get to show you. Again, we had a pretty tight time frame here, so I apologize for that. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. I think I hit on most of the highlights, especially since we had such a broad audience for ALM. And for the PPM people as well, we have that full integration into PPM and bringing all that time tracking and project update into PPM. And a lot of these charts and graphs also synchronize up to PPM for the PPM folks. But I'm going to go ahead and go to the closing slide and turn it back over to Ty and Stefan for questions.
Brilliant, John. Thank you ever so much for that. That looks really impressive. One request to the audience, please continue to ask questions. We have a number of questions that I'll pose to John and Ty and for them to answer, but if you think of anything else as we're going along, please ask and we'll have a look. The second one is just as a reminder that please wait to the end of this presentation as we've got some exciting news about HP Discover. And a final reminder, we've had a couple of questions asked if the slides will be available. Yes, they will be. There will be an email sent out in about 1 to 2 days with a link to this webinar. Okay, so John and Ty, let's start with the first question. Let's start with a sort of configuration setup question from Paul. What is the lowest version of ALM that is compatible to integrate with Agile Manager?
11.
Okay.
11.x.
Simple as that.
Yeah. Simple as that. 11.x and forward.
Perfect. Okay. So the second one, let's do with sort of an install type question. So what is the platform for on-premise installation from Levi?
Yeah, so the on-prem runs on a Linux Oracle environment. So it requires 2 Linux servers. They can be virtual machines. VMs are fine. And then Oracle 11G or higher for the database.
Excellent. Okay. And clearly there's further support needed if people need more details on that.
Absolutely. So we have documentation on full on-prem installation guides, configurations, but the foundation of it is Linux and Oracle.
Perfect. Thank you very much, John. Okay, so let's, in no particular order now, does all of the scheduled effort / duration and actual time integrate into PPM work plan, staffing profile, and timesheets from Stephen?
Yes, it does. So in both cases, so all the user story, invested time synchronizes over, and then the timesheets also synchronize over. The developer can log into PPM and say, I want to import my timesheet, and it'll bring his time from Agile Manager and update it into PPM.
That sounds very useful, actually, from a project program management perspective as well.
We really wanted to keep that simple. Developers generally dislike having to go into PPM and log all their time. And they're like, I already did all this logging of my time in Agile Manager by updating my tasks. So we take that information that the developers already did, keeping their tasks up to date, and we just import that right to their PPM timesheets. And I think I think there was a Vivid webinar on that a month or so ago, so you could probably go look at the replay of that webinar that that Ty actually had hosted, and I think they demoed part of that. So.
Okay. Fantastic. Next question then, how are the done hours calculated in the planning? There's a sub point on the members widgets used on the sprint backlog page.
Say that again? How are the done hours calculated?
Yeah, how are done hours calculated that the planning members widgets use on the sprint backlog page from Charles?
So I would say that if I'm answering this correctly, the done hours are the combination of all the task hours to complete the user story. So if I have a user story and it had 4 tasks, and each of those tasks was 5 hours, there would be a total of 20 hours of time. If I retire all of those tasks, and I do it on time, I do each of them in 5 hours, the done hours are going to be cumulative of that 20 hours of effort. If it took me longer, let's say we did that task estimate of each of 5 hours, and it took us 6 hours to do each of those tasks, well, the done hours are now going to be 24 hours, and you have a chart that shows we estimated 24 hours, but the actual was 24 to complete all that work and to put it into a done status. And again, that's available dashboard elements, so you can look at those estimated hours and then actual hours, see what that difference is. But it's accumulation of all the tasks being completed to generate the amount of hours to done of the story. Again, only development effort, though. That would not count any time it took for quality to work on it. That would be separate time tracking in ALM.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so the last question I've got at the moment is when you drag a ticket to the media store, are members of the team notified? There's a sub-question, is the ticket assigned a priority, or is that done later, from Mary?
So a couple of things on that. So it can be assigned
Yes.
a priority. It doesn't need to be. Again, that's a choice depending on how you want to work the workflow. The workflow is customizable from that perspective. So you can assign it a priority of high, medium, and low, and you can actually prioritize it in the backlog overall and set how you want to deliver that work. When it is assigned to just the media store or a release, there will be no notifications sent. I'm not sure who you would send the notification to on the release. For it to move from the backlog to a release planning, that's something that the team is probably doing along with the product owner when they're doing their release planning. And even when it's moved into a sprint, that would be part of that sprint planning, and the entire Scrum team should be involved in that sprint planning progress. Where we do send notification is when a story is assigned to a team member or a task is assigned to a team member. So we can send an email notification that a task has been assigned to you, or you've assigned yourself a task so you can manage that work. So there are a lot of notifications, but generally down at the team member level, when something happens to a team member, we would send out a notification.
Okay. That's great. I appreciate now we're at the top of the hour, so we may start losing 1 or 2 people. What I'd like to do is just cover 2 more slides whilst I've got people's attention, and then I don't know, time, John, are you free for another 5 minutes later if there's any other questions that need asking?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, so let's just move, as I mentioned earlier, we've got HP Discover in Las Vegas this year. It's June the 2nd to the 4th at the Venetian Resort at Las Vegas. All members can register now via the specific URL. If you use that, you will get some money off, so that's a really useful feature there. So please, can I encourage people to do it. HP Discover is an amazing event, and I'll thoroughly encourage people to attend it. Another special aspect is that Vivid is pleased to offer deep dive sessions. These sessions will allow you to hear real-world implementation experiences and examples from practitioners who are in the field of solving business problems with HP software tools. So real live examples here from people delivering it. So these sessions will be held the day before HP Discovers on Monday the 1st of June from 1 p.m. to 5. More information can be found on Vivid, and can I just encourage everybody to have a look. And then finally on to the last slide. Just remains me to thank you all for this. please can you encourage everybody to complete the short survey and to opt in for more information from HP's software. The survey is very useful for us, both Divit and HP, for all of us to learn about how we can do things, how things can be made better, and get some genuine feedback from yourself. So can I encourage everybody to do that? So that concludes the core part of the webinar. John and Ty, thank you very much. I don't know if
thanks,
you
John, thanks, Ty, and thanks, Vivek, for hosting this webinar for us. And I hope all the participants found it informative. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with us.
Yes, thank you. Be sure to download the free trial.
Perfect. Okay.
Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good day, everybody. Thank you very much.